Hello Internet, and welcome to my very first Virus sound design workout. In this video, as the name suggests, I want to help you understand this instrument and what you can do with it through a series of workouts just like in the gym. Basically, we will take a couple of my patches, we'll break them down, and then we'll recreate them step by step. So you will be able to see how the synthesizer is operating and how the different elements are interacting with each other. If you're interested in such series of videos, let me know down in the comment section and I'll make sure to make more of these. Now, with that said, before we dive into this tutorial, this video is sponsored by yours truly. So if you'd like to help me make more of these videos and support the channel, make sure you like, subscribe, or maybe check out my masterclasses and preset packs on my Gumroad, or maybe buy me a coffee. Things like that helps the channel a lot. Now, that said, let's dive into this tutorial. For the first patch, I have a preset from my Virus Psytrance Preset pack called Sample and Hold Mutate. It sounds like this. Basically, it's a mixture of two of the things that I think the Virus does really well, the squelch and the FM. To recreate it, let's take a blank instance of Ostiaris, basically an initial patch. Nothing too special. Now to create a squelch, we need a saw wave. For that, I'll take the second oscillator, just like so. Keep it on a saw wave, and we need to modulate its pitch. So for that, let's go to the LFO in here. The first LFO, as you can see, it's already pre-routed to modulate the pitch of the first and the second oscillators. So for that, we will use it. I'll set it to sample and glide because I want kind of like a humanized modulation. I'll keep the clock in here to 1 and 4, and I'll set the trigger phase to 1. Basically, when you set the trigger phase in here to 1, every time the synthesizer, the Virus, will receive a new note, it's going to re-trigger the cycle or reset the cycle of the LFO. Of course, because this is a sample and hold kind of patches, we need a random arpeggiator. I'll go with autoplay. It's my first choice, but you can go with whatever you like. Sounding already like a squelch, but the pitch modulation range isn't enough. I want to go higher. So for that, I'm going to use the assign destination in here. Basically, it's a free assignable extra modulation destination, let's say, for both LFO1 and LFO2. This will free up some space in the matrix, basically. So what I'll do, I'll take the assigned destination of the first LFO in here, and I'll set it to modulate the pitch of the second oscillator. And this is something amazing in the Virus because it allows you to double the modulations, because sometimes in other hardware synthesizers you can't double the modulation because, I don't know, it takes a lot of processing power or whatever. Anyways, luckily with the Virus we can do that. So let's give it some pitch modulation like this. Now we have this. Perfect, we're getting those laser kind of squelch sounds, right? So let's filter it down and finish the initial squelch sound. For that, let's go to the filter. I'll use only filter number 1. So let's take the slider in here, set it to filter number 1. Let's set the filter to band pass, close it, give it some resonance. Now we have this. But the filter is set to serial 4. Basically, it's a 12 dB per octave filter. I want a steeper filter, right? So let's go with serial 6. This is a 24 dB per octave filter. So now we have this. And pay attention to this. If the filter routing is set to serial 4 or serial 6, it's going to only affect the poles of the first filter. The second filter is always a 12 dB filter, no matter what routing we have in here. Okay, so now we have this. Perfect. And what I'm going to do, I want to modulate this filter, but I want to get this pseudo-humanized modulation too, right? So I'm going to use the first LFO for that. So let's go to the matrix in here. Let's take the first LFO bipolar. I want the bipolar one, not the unipolar. Why is that? Because I just want to keep the filter cutoff in here because it sounds like a sweet spot and I want it to modulate like this. And the bipolar LFO gives me this result. So let's go back to the matrix in here. First LFO, assign destination to the cutoff of the first filter. Let's give it some modulation, and now we have this. Perfect, we're getting those laser squelches. I really love that. Actually, we can go to the LFO in here and modulate the resonance of the first and the second filter. As you can see, it's already pre-routed. So we'll get sometimes a bit more lasery sound because there will be a bit more resonance and sometimes a bit less. Check this out. Perfect. Now we have the initial squelch sounds. Now let's add that FM. So luckily, the second oscillator has the FM already pre-routed to it. Actually, this is the only way to do FM on the Virus, right? It's a hidden third oscillator following the oscillator 1 pitch that is going to FM the second oscillator. But this only works for post-triangle and triangle algorithm, else it's going to be the first oscillator. It's not gritty enough. So you know what I'll do? I'll take the first oscillator 1 octave lower. So basically the FMing oscillator will follow it and will go 1 octave lower. So now we have this. Sounding really interesting. Now to get the grittiest FM from the Virus, what I usually do is sync the second oscillator to the first oscillator. So now we have this. See the character? Let's take the filter down for a second. I'll set it to low pass and I'll open it all the way. So now we have this. Hear that virusy timbre, the grittiness, the juiciness out of it. Let's take the sync off. Still sounds good, but honestly I prefer with the sync on. And on top of that, when the sync is on, if there's no FM, we'll get that famous sync sound from the second oscillator because we're modulating its pitch, right? So we'll get that sync effect. Check this out. Without the sync, we have this. But with the sync, we have this kind of like 8-bit artifacts, kind of. Check this out. Sounds super cool. Let's get the filter back the way it was. Right, give it some resonance like so, band pass. Perfect. And now I'll go to the LFO in here. I'll take the second LFO, set it to sample and hold, keep the clock to 118, trigger phase to 1. So restart the cycle every time it receives a new note. And what I'll do in here, I'll keep the FM to 0, but in the matrix, I'll take the unipolar second LFO and I'm going to use it to modulate the FM amount in here. So let's go to the matrix. Let's set the destination in here to oscillator to FM like this and just give it a tiny bit. I don't want it to modulate like in crazy values. This should be more than enough. Check this out. So sometimes we have this kind of like raw squelch with the sync artifacts that we've just added, and sometimes we have the FM sound. So basically the patch is alternating between a little bit of FM, a little bit of squelch, a little bit of FM, a little bit of squelch. Perfect. And to finish it off, I'll go to the effects in here and I'll add some distortion, right? I'll add the light distortion. We don't need more than the light one. Well, at least to my taste. I think with some drive, we get a really nice and gritty sound. Check this out. That crunchiness. Right. Now let's add a little bit of delay. I'll go to the delay in here. I'll set it to ping pong 2 to 1. I'll set it to 1 and 8. Give it some feedback and a tiny bit of the internal LFO modulation. And let's give it some send. Now we have this. And with the kick and bass. Now for the second patch, we'll recreate the sample and hold Vibe preset from my Virus Psytrance Vol1 Preset pack. And this is where we will get into the essence of this Virus TI sound. You know, like the sound that made the Virus that famous, especially in the Psytrance scene. Basically sounds like this. You know what sound I'm talking about, right? So let's go to our initialized patch and recreate the sound from scratch. So here we have our blank patch, and to kick things off, I've already created a sequence in the arpeggiator. Sounds like this. Nothing too special, pretty basic. So let's go to the oscillators in here and take whatever oscillator you like. Let's go with the first oscillator and let's set it to grain simple. I want to keep things a bit simple for this tutorial, so we're going with the grain simple algorithm, right? You'll see it's super powerful. So for the wave select in here, I'm going to go with the famous Sundial wavetable, right? Sounds like this. Now let's take the F shift in here to down a little bit. Set it to maybe minus 36, something like that. Now I have this. Hear those nasty clicks? Let's take the punch parameter in here, the intensity to 0. Check this out. Changes everything, right? And to make it even smoother, what we can do is set the phase init in here to 0. Check this out. And this is actually a trick in the virus. When the punch parameter isn't enough to smooth things out, what you can do is find a phase position that will give you a smoother result. Now that said, let's start modulating things with the oscillator. So what I'll do, I'll go to the LFO in here, right? The first LFO, I'm going to set it to sample and hold. I'll leave the clock to 1 and 8. I'll set the trigger phase to 1. Restart the cycle every time it receives a new note. And the first thing I'm going to do is modulate the pitch of the first oscillator, but just a tiny bit to give the sound a little bit of movement, right? So let's go with about 25%, something like that. Now we have this. So just like giving it a little bit of a wiggle. Now, I'm going to go to the matrix in here. I'll take the first LFO unipolar and I'll make it modulate the F shift or the frequency shift of the first oscillator, right? And why LFO unipolar? Because I wanted to modulate only in this range. You know, this is a really nice sweet spot. Right, because above it, the sound will be a bit too thin and resonant, if that makes sense. Check this out. I don't want that. I want it to stay in this kind of like sweet zone in here because it sounds organic yet glassy. You know what I mean? So let's put it back to minus 36 like so. And let's go to the matrix in here and set the oscillator 1 frequency shift to plus 36, just like so. So now we have this. We're getting that famous virusy sound, right? And now what I want to do is filter things down. But what I'm going to do is use one of my oldest tricks, let's say, for the virus. And it's basically creating a fake kind of a formant filter. I don't want to create a formant filter because there's a formant filter in the effects section of the virus, right? So I don't want that formanty sound. I just want like kind of a formanty feeling, okay? So what I'll do, the first filter in here, I'm going to set it to bandpass, close it, take off the cutoff link. The cutoff link basically will link both cutoffs together. So when I move this one will follow it. I don't want that. And let's take the second filter, set it to bandpass 2, close it, just like so. Give both of them a lot of resonance. And the routing in here will be parallel 4. Right, so parallel 4, we have two 12 dB per octave filter in parallel. So the oscillator will basically split into 2 signals and each will go to a different filter. So the first filter sounds like this. All right, and the second filter sounds like this. But together, let's set the filter balance to in between 1 and 2. Let's offset them just a tiny bit. Like the first one, let's say it's on 71. The second one will be on like 75, like just tiny bit. And by the way, when I give values, check this section of the screen because it gives exactly the value I'm talking about. Okay, so now I've set the cutoffs to somewhere around 70. I've offsetted them a little bit. So what I'll do, go to the LFO in here, take the second LFO, keep it on a triangle. I'll set it to something slow, like 2 on 1. I just want to add a tiny bit of movement on these cutoffs. The first cutoff, let's modulate it to the right, and the second cutoff, let's modulate it to the left. You can feel the movement that the filters are creating with the slow LFO, right? Now to finish the sound and give it that ultimate virusy sound, what we will do, we'll go to the FXs in here, the first one, and we will use the conf filter. Take the conf filter, right? We'll set the frequency to F0 because this track I'm working on is an F, right? Like so. Give it some amount and let's play with the resonance. Now we have this. See, we got that virusy sound like right away. You know what I'll do? I'll set the resonance somewhere in here. Now I'll go to the LFOs. I'll take the third LFO, right? I'll set it to a shape 14, let's say. Wave 14 is one of the waves of the oscillators, and it's kind of like a bunch of sine waves. I love it because it gives us a wiggly kind of modulation. And what I'll do in the matrix, take the second slot in here, I'll take the LFO unipolar and I'll make it modulate the resonance of the comp filter. So filter bank resonance. And let's give it some modulation like so. And in the LFO, I'll set it to a slow rate somewhere like, 30 to 34, whatever. And now we have this. And with the kick and bass, we'll get this. And with this is the end of this tutorial. I really hope you've liked it. I really hope you've learned something new. If you like this video and want to see more of it, leave me a comment down in the comment section. And with this, I'll see you in the next one.